Hi, and welcome to 200 Days in Hardcore Minecraft. But this isn't just any old hardcore series. This is Hardcore Duo Edition. This means that if either of us die, the whole thing is over. Also, if you haven't already seen us surviving the first 100 days, you can check that out here. But anyway, in the first 100 days, we managed to kill the Ender Dragon, get a full set of netherite armor, and kill the Wither. However, for 200 days we had a new set of goals in mind. The first was to get some elytras, the second is to get a full beacon using these guys, and the third was to conquer a raid. Anyway, that's enough talking for now, let's get straight into day 101. It was our first day back in the world, so we decided to start it off by watching the sunrise. Of course we couldn't resist saying hello to all of our animals, but we did need some food, so yeah, this had to happen. Once we'd finished chopping up our friends, we decided to roast their flesh around a campfire. Yeah, sorry to any vegans out there. Anyway, now that that's out of the way, we decided it was time to find some more villages because our other ones vanished. So we set off from our lovely dock, constructed by Lockdown, and headed off to the village. By the time we reached the area of the village, it was already becoming night, so we decided to take our first nap of the 100 days. In the morning of day 102, we continued our search for the village by retracing our steps along the river. But it kinda turns out we didn't know which way we were going, so we got a bit lost. But eventually, after a bit more searching on foot, we discovered the village again. Also, if you're wondering why we didn't note down the coordinates of the village, it's because Lockdown threw the coordinates in the bin. Silly Lockdown. Anyway, once we reached the village, we stole some of their precious hay and then took a little sleep in one of their houses overnight. The next day we got up bright and early so we could abduct some more villagers. Then we spent the whole rest of the day endlessly rowing our villagers back to our base. Just before we got back to the compound, I decided to take refuge on this tiny island. This was to keep both me and the villagers safe. Once day broke, we wasted no time in getting the villagers over to our base. But now it was time for the most annoying thing in Minecraft, dealing with these guys. After a long and aggravating day of dealing with the villagers, we got fed up with them, so we decided to trap them inside of this tiny box. On day 105, I installed a glass roof so we could watch them get up to their business. And while I was being weird, Lockdown was installing a place for the babies to get captured. The next morning, I woke up and rushed downstairs to discover that the villagers had made a little baby. But this wasn't really the best of news because this baby was probably the most annoying thing we've ever had to deal with. It was running absolutely everywhere and wouldn't do what we said. But eventually it was dumb enough to run straight back into our trap. Then while we were trying to make a path for the villagers, another baby was born. This was not good news because now it meant twice the trouble. Once we were ready, we let the babies out and they were extremely annoying and decided to both get stuck in these tiny holes. Once we managed to get one of the babies into the correct place, Lockdown was so annoyed by this point that he decided to murder the other one. Now it was time for the adult villagers to get into their tiny breeding hole. But it seems they weren't too fussed and they jumped straight in. On day 107 we woke up to find that both of our villagers had escaped from their tiny hole. So we spent the remainder of the day trying to work out the kinks in our breeder. By day 108 we were ready to test our breeder, so we threw some food at the villagers' faces and then they popped out a little baby. Then the baby was quickly snatched away from their family and brought down this tiny water tube. Once we had a few babies in the villager room, we decided to make a staircase back up to the surface. On day 109, we found out that our villager breeder had broken again. At this point, we were starting to realise that we weren't very good at making villager breeders. So we spent the rest of the day having countless issues trying to get the villagers back into the correct places. And even at one point, the farmer had the audacity to steal one of the other villagers' beds. Then, just before we went to bed, I took out all of my anger on this iron golem. In the morning, it seemed that we'd fixed all of the issues with the villager breeder, until Lockdown got himself trapped in with all of the villagers. But luckily, he managed to get out by using the water bucket. On day 111, I said hello to the growing number of Lockdown's dogs. Then, once they'd had a few strokes, I collected some wood so I could decorate the staircase leading down to our villager dungeon. While I was doing all that, Lockdown was attempting to get some mending villagers. Luckily, by day 112, Lockdown managed to get a mending villager. This was amazing because now it meant that none of our gear would break ever again. Now it was my turn to try and get a good trade, so I got this nice farming villager which we could trade some pumpkins with. The next day I decided to finish off decorating this staircase and then I built a nice shelter above it. That night, myself and Lockdown went into the nether to try and find some gold. We needed gold for golden apples so we could cure some villagers and make their trades better. Once we'd acquired enough gold, we headed back into the overworld and then we started the construction of a melon farm. On day 115, we finished off the melon farm. While we were waiting for the first melon to grow, we decided to capture some zombies so we could cure our villagers. That night we managed to turn all of our villagers into zombies, but unfortunately one of our villagers actually died. We were just praying that it wasn't the mending villager. By the morning, all of our villagers were cured, and lucky for us, the villager that died was not the mending villager. Then, once those villagers were sorted out, I headed back up to the surface and continued farming some melons. The next morning, I was clearing out land for a pumpkin farm, and I all of a sudden fell into this cave and got scared to death by the zombie villager. So, I decided to stab it in the face as punishment. On day 118, I put in the finishing touches to the pumpkin farm, and then I had another go at getting a villager to trade pumpkins or melons with. But for some reason, I didn't realise you can't get melons or pumpkins as the first trade on a villager. Good one, gamers. But finally, by day 119, I realised what I was doing wrong and managed to get a pumpkin trade. Then, later that night, Lockdown brought out all of his dogs so they could see the hard work we'd been putting into the farms. I kinda wish I had some dogs now. The next day was basically the same as the last few, just a bit of farming and trading, and while I was doing that, Lockdown was attempting to get another feather falling 4 villager. Once we had enough emeralds from trading with the villagers, I decided to put mending on all of my gear. On day 121, I bred all of our sheep and then chopped them up ready to be eaten. Once we had a nice little snack ready for us, I decided to get some potions ready so we could go and get some elytras in the end. We spent the entirety of day 122 trying to get gunpowder. I started off down in this abandoned mine shaft, and then later on at night we went up to the surface to get some more creepers. The reason we needed all this gunpowder is because we wanted to make some rockets so that when we got elytras it was easier to get home. By the way, I definitely don't recommend seeking out creepers. By the next morning, Lockdown had finally been able to get a feather falling 3 villager. So we got some books and enchanted our boots with feather falling. Hopefully it would help us survive any attacks from pesky shulkers. Once our boots were sorted out, we gathered up all of the gear that I'd prepared in the previous day, and then we were ready to head towards the end. Hopefully this would be the last time we'd have to use any stupid boats. Once again, Lockdown had yeeted all of the coordinates to the end portal into the bin. So we were stuck travelling through thick forests and vast oceans to try and find the end portal once again. And finally, after a while of fighting our way through mobs and the snow, we had rediscovered our end portal. Once it was day 125, we decided it was time to enter back into the end. So we jumped on through and I swiftly built up to one of the end gateways. Hopefully through there we'd be able to find an end city and get our hands on some elytras. Once we set foot on the end islands, we splashed ourselves with some swiftness to hopefully speed up the search. Then, in a matter of minutes, there it was, an end city, and best of all, it had a ship. Then me and Lockdown decided to have a race to see who would get the elytra first, because we agreed whoever got the first elytra could fly on and get the second one. Luckily, I managed to pillar up faster and got my hands on the special wings. Once I had my wings tightly strapped to my back, I set off in the search of another elytra. I have no clue how we were getting so lucky, but only a few hundred blocks in that direction, there was another end boat. So I swooped inside, snatched up the elytra and headed back towards Lockdown. Once I'd handed the wings over to Lockdown, we stayed at the city for a little while longer to loot the chests and get some shulker shells. Once we were ready, we glided on back to the end gateway and then went to bed. We spent all of day 127 messing around with our new elytras, and it was actually pretty fun. The next morning, I gathered some leaves and some other resources into a shulker, ready for our next project. Then that night, I discovered that Lockdown had started a pumpkin and melon pile, so I decided to add some more pumpkins to it. Then we went hunting for creepers so we could get some more gunpowder to make some more rockets. And this is where I almost died. I was swapping my elytra out of my chest plate, and yes, a creeper blew up straight behind me. I guess that's why I should always check my surroundings before going in my inventory. On day 129, we finished gathering all the resources together for our next project, and then I did a bit more farming and added to the pumpkin and melon pile. At this point it was so big it was overflowing our walls. In the morning we set off with all of the items that we'd gathered in the past few days, ready to build our new project, which was going to be an Enderman Farm in the end. Once we were back in the end, we began building down to Y level 0. Even though we had elytras on, this was still really scary because there was a void right below us. Once we reached the correct level, we built out around 300 blocks away from the main island so that no Enderman would spawn on it. And while we were building this path, I accidentally chucked the majority of my food straight into the void. We spent the next few days constructing the majority of the farm, and now it was time for the finishing touch, to add in an Endermite. This was actually one of the most dangerous things we've done so far, because I almost died a few times trying to get the Endermite. Once everything was in place, it was time to break the torches and the Endermen started flooding in. But now that all the hard work was done, it was time to reap the rewards of endless XP. So I borrowed Lockdown's sword and started slashing some ankles. Once we were happy with how much XP we got, we decided to head back into the overworld. In the morning, I used the majority of the levels that I got in the previous day to try and get some sharpness books to put on my axe. But unfortunately, I didn't manage to get up to sharpness 5. Then once again, I added some more melons and pumpkins to the ever-growing pile. Afterwards, I spent all of day 135 trying to get an Unbreaking 3 villager. Then on day 136, we began digging out the area for our villager trading hall. But now it was time to design the interior, so we spent the whole next day collecting wood as we knew the interior would take a lot of it. Finally, it was time to start placing some blocks, so we spent the next 2 days designing the interior of the trading hall. Then on day 140 we started the long and tedious task of moving all of the villagers into their correct places. We managed to get quite a few in by the end of the day, but it still wasn't finished. Day 141 was filled with endless breaking and placing of lecterns, hoping to get Unbreaking 3. The next day, Lockdown decided to let his army of dogs loose on this poor sheep, and also on me. Then once again we added to the enormous melon and pumpkin pile. Day 143 was yet again another day of trying to get Unbreaking 3, but unfortunately I didn't get lucky. But on day 144 I finally managed to get an Unbreaking 3 villager. So I quickly locked in its trade and then shoved it into the trading hall. By the next morning we decided that we were fed up of villager trading, so we set out on the quest of finding ourselves some horses. After a while of trying horses of all shapes and sizes, I found the one. I don't know how or why, but this horse for some reason could jump 4 meters high, and he was also pretty fast. On day 146 it was time to get my horse back to our base, but this wasn't going to be an easy task because we were around 2,000 blocks away. On the way back we had to climb some pretty steep hills, so I was glad that my horse was a parkour master. Once I set my eyes back on our base after our long journey, it was an amazing feeling. The next morning I brewed some weakness potions and crafted some golden apples ready to cure some more villagers. Then later on that night, myself and Lockdown started working on a sugarcane farm. For the next few days we let zombies chow down on our villagers in the hopes that they would give us better trades out of fear. And yeah, don't question why we were building out of melons and pumpkins. Then on day 151 we found the weirdest sight. My horse was standing on top of the wall right next to the melon and pumpkin pile. I guess he really just liked pumpkins. Once we discovered what my horse was doing, Lockdown did the only sane thing and put it inside the 69 statue. Yeah, I do question what's wrong with him sometimes. Anyway, once Lockdown's weirdness was out of the way, we decided to do some trading and we managed to get 24 emerald blocks, so we had to do a little bit of flexing. But now our minds were set on one goal, to obtain enough emerald blocks to get a full beacon. So over the next several days we did some trading with our villagers, and then we did more trading, and then a bit more trading, and yeah, I think you get the point, we did a lot of trading. But over those several days a few interesting things did happen, such as the destruction of the mighty pumpkin and melon pile, the deaths and resurrections of some of our villagers, and finally mine and Lockdown's tiny archery battle. But by the end of it all, we'd managed to get enough emeralds to get a full beacon. On day 158 we gathered up all of our emerald blocks and rushed outside to start constructing the beacon. First we placed down all of our emeralds in the shape of a beacon to make sure we had enough, and then we admired our handiwork. Once we'd finished flexing on ourselves, we dug a hole underneath the lukethenotable memorial and constructed the beacon underneath. Now we finally had those sick hops we'd always hoped for. Once we'd finished testing out our new powers, Lockdown decided to steal my horse. So I gave one of his dogs a little love tap to get his attention, and then the dog attacked me and he may have died to my thorns. Sorry Lockdown. The whole next day me and my horse avoided being murdered by Lockdown because he was pretty angry about his dog. The next mission that we wanted to complete was to conquer a Bastion, so I decided to spend the next 2 days getting sharpness 5 on my axe. I would need to deal as much damage as possible if I stood any chance against those piglins. Finally, by day 161 I had managed to get sharpness 5. By day 162, we were finally kitted out to take on a Bastion, so we entered into the Nether and began our search for a Bastion. After a while of searching, we finally found one, so we quickly landed and Lockdown carefully began bridging over to it. Once we were on top of its walls, we began sniping down at all of the piglins that were guarding their treasure. Once they were taken care of, it was time to steal some of their delicious gold. Then out of nowhere, a giant pack of piglins came charging right at us. Luckily we managed to get out of the way and then shoot them with our bows. The rest of the looting went relatively smoothly, so we decided to head on over to another Bastion for a better challenge. However, the next Bastion actually went pretty well, other than the fact that I almost died in lava. That was a close one. On day 165, we stored away all of the loot that we'd got from the Bastions. Then we spent the rest of the day having a little play fight, and Lockdown actually almost killed me. The next morning, I started gathering loads of resources together because I decided I wanted to build a mob farm. And while I'd be building this mob farm, Lockdown decided to build a bigger doghouse because his other one was getting a little bit cramped. The next day, I chose a nice little place to build the mob farm, and then I got to work on constructing it. By day 167, myself and Lockdown had both made some good progress on our builds. In the morning, the main structure of the farm was complete, so I decided to add in the redstone that would actually make it function properly. If I'm being honest, I don't have too much of an idea what all of this redstone does, but hopefully it should work. The next day, I decided to add the finishing touches to the farm, such as some water, some torches, and an AFK platform. That night, I ran out of rockets, so I had to get home the peasant way and actually use my feet. But on my way back, I actually almost died to a ton of mobs. I think I need to start being a bit more careful. On the morning of day 170, I decided to do some farming, and then I traded with our villagers. Then by the time I'd finished doing all that, mine and Lockdown's builds were finally finished. So we decided to AFK at the top of the mob farm for a few minutes to see how much gunpowder we could get. And to our surprise, we got almost 20 gunpowder in a minute. That was amazing because now it meant unlimited rockets. Because we were running low on bones, string and gunpowder, we decided to spend all of day 171 AFKing at the top of the mob farm. And by the end of the day, we managed to get a massive amount of mob drops. Then by day 172, it was finally time for Lockdown's dogs to be moved into their new house. So I brought along my horse to help them get settled in, but once again, Lockdown tried to murder my horse. I'm starting to think that he's not the biggest fan of it. Anyway, to finish off the day, I did some carrot farming and then we went to bed. The next day was spent farming and trading because we would need more emerald blocks for our next project. Also that night I caught Lockdown vandalising our house. Anyway, in the morning we scraped together all the emeralds we could find and began converting the Luke the Notable memorial into emeralds. If you didn't already know this, in Luke the Notable's hardcore series, he turned his tower into emeralds, so we wanted to keep it in the same vein and do the same to ours. Anyway, once we'd used up all the emerald blocks we had, we realised how big of a project this was going to be. So that night we decided to cure another villager so we could get some more valuable trades. By day 175 we were fed up of doing stuff around the base, so we decided it was time to complete our final goal, to defeat a raid. This would probably be one of the hardest things we'd done so far, so we spent the whole day preparing for the battle by brewing up some potions. In the morning we quickly gathered together all of the potions that we'd prepared in the previous day, and then we went to say goodbye to all of Lockdown's dogs. This could be our last adventure, as raids are known as the hardest challenge in Minecraft. As we flew away from our base, we were prepared for the end, but we soldiered on in the hopes of finding a pillager outpost. After what seemed like hours of scouring the endless landscapes, we set our eyes upon the pillager base. They shot wave after wave of arrows, but they were no match for our netherite armor. Finally, after slaughtering the pesky pillagers, Lockdown managed to get the bad omen effect. This meant that when we found a village, we could now start a raid. Once we spotted a small village in the distance, we swooped down and started constructing our defense on one of the poor villagers' houses. As the raid bar slowly ticked up, our hearts began to race. As the first wave poured in, we were under pillager fire, but we overwhelmed their forces and quickly took them all out. Once the next wave arrived, we decided it was time for some hand-to-hand combat. So we jumped down and I started swinging my axe. They went down one by one and soon they were all gone. Now we were in a rhythm of taking out wave after wave of the pesky pillagers. But now it was the 6th wave and we were quickly being overwhelmed by their forces. As 2 Vindicators ganged up on me, I almost died, but I managed to get some distance and shot them with my bow. It was the final wave, and I was quickly swarmed by 3 ravagers. So I swiftly pillared up, but I was being shot down by the other invaders. As I was brought down to just 3 hearts, I quickly sprinted away and ate a golden apple. Then swarm after swarm of tiny vexes were chipping away at my hearts, but they were no match for my trusty axe. And before we knew it, the raid was over and we had done it. Finally, all 3 of our goals were complete and we were heroes of the village. Once we got home, Lockdown's dogs were there to greet us, and then we went straight to bed. The next day, to have a break after our hard-fought battles, we decided to mess around with the Totems of Undying. Lockdown had the bright idea to fly up to Y level 1000, and then drop down to see if he could survive. Yeah, I don't know what he thought would come out of that. Then I had a go at the same thing, but I decided to try and save myself with an elytra. But yeah, that didn't turn out too great. Later that night, Lockdown had the thought of getting blown up by creepers to see if we could survive. And surprisingly, we actually could. But I didn't expect to get all the way down on 2.5 hearts. That was pretty scary. We spent all of day 179 trading with villagers, and we realised that villagers actually need workstations to refresh their trades. I was wondering why they didn't want to take any more melons. Day 180 was mainly filled with trading with our villagers and curing them for better trades. But at one point the zombie went rogue and almost killed me. Also, a villager decided to escape down into the mines. Then day 181 was basically the same as the last few, just trading and curing our villagers. And while I was doing that, Lockdown went into the nether to do some netherite mining. By day 182, I've finally been able to get some perfect farming villager trades. So I spent the rest of 182, all of 183 and of 184 trading with the villagers to get some emerald blocks. All of these emeralds were slowly building up towards the goal of getting the full Luke the Notable tower. And on the night of day 184, Lockdown finally came back from netherite mining. On day 185, I discovered that because my axe has fortune 3, it gives me way more carrots if I break them with it. I bet a lot of you guys were watching this video and face palming over that. But anyway, it was a great discovery because it meant loads more emeralds for us. By the next day, we were pretty fed up of villagers, so we gathered some resources together and constructed this cool little plane right next to our tower. We decided we were going to add a word on the banner behind it, so see if you can guess what word it's going to be. For all of day 186, I was struggling to learn how to make banners, but in the end I finally got the grasp of it. Then on the morning of day 188, we headed up to the plane and placed down our word. And if you guessed the word was subscribe, you got it right. If you're still watching the video now, I think that means you are enjoying it. So if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button, it would be massively appreciated, because this video took around 50 hours to make. Anyway, that's enough self-promotion, let's get straight back into the video. On day 189, I chopped some carrots with my axe, smacked my head on the wall, and did some trading. Finally, after all these days of trading, it was time to use all of our emerald blocks to change our tower into emerald. But unfortunately, after all of those hours we put into getting emeralds, we still didn't have enough. So out of disappointment, we stormed upstairs to our bedroom and went to bed. We then spent the next 3 days frantically running between our trader and our farm to try and get enough emerald blocks to complete the tower. Also, at the end of day 192, Lockdown almost killed me again. He was definitely way more dangerous than any mob. Anyway, on day 193, it was finally time to fill in the tower. So we climbed the long ladder and started placing emerald blocks once again. But even after all of our efforts in the past few days, we were still shy by a few blocks. This was probably one of the most frustrating things that happened in the whole 100 days. But finally, after one more day of grinding, the tower was complete. And it looked glorious. On day 196, I crafted up some redstone components, and while I was doing that, Lockdown was back in the nether doing some more netherite mining. Then the next day, I placed down the redstone ready for the final fireworks show. Then finally, Lockdown came back and we got full netherite tools. On day 198, I finished off the redstone, and then on 199, I collected some dye ready for our colourful display. Now all there was left to do on day 200 was to craft our rocket and sit back and enjoy the show. Once again, we had done it and we had survived 200 days in hardcore Minecraft. Also, if you haven't already checked out Lockdown's perspective, I would massively recommend doing so, as it is really interesting to see both our point of views. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. See you later.